Welcome to our webinar today, where we're going to be talking about GenAI adoption, the pitfalls and roadmap to success. I'm your host, Caroline Hill. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider. We know that GenAI projects are 90% adoption and 10% technology. And in this webinar with legal technology transformation consultancy Stridon, we're going to be discussing how firms can achieve engagement with new tools and increase safe adoption. So my guest today is Stridon's CEO, which doesn't stand for what you think it stands for. So your Chief Experience Officer, Matthew, and he's the founder. And we're going to be talking about the struggles that firms are facing and what's working in terms of building processes that work. We'll be also sharing Stridon's tried and tested Microsoft Copilot success roadmap that it shares with clients such as Wedlake Bell. So to introduce Matthew properly, so as I said, Chief Experience Officer of Stridon, he's held roles including Director of Precision IT and Director of A+ Computer Services. But for the past 17 years, he's been he founded Stridon, which is a London-founded consultancy that works with legal and professional services clients. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Caroline. Great to be with you today on what seems to be an audience joining us from all over the place. Everybody with smiley, happy, sunshine faces.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. And that is right. And it is super hot, except this is available on recording. So if you're listening to this in December, don't be too jealous. We're going to be taking questions as we go. We've got a really packed conversation today. We are going to be talking about I'm going to get Matthew to introduce Stridon properly in a second. And then we're going to be talking about the sort of programs that Stridon's involved in, Wedlake Bell being one and the kind of poster child. They've done a lot with Stridon on case studies. We're going to be talking about the programs where they leverage Microsoft Copilot and help firms to achieve better /AI policies full stop. So we're going to be looking very much at the foundational level. So Stridon's got this great insight. What's brilliant is that you work with different firms, your objective, you can talk about all the different experiences across the board. So we're going to be talking about how to create proof of value in a collaborative way, how you get teams involved. We're very much focusing on the human element, which I absolutely love, because I bang on all the time, as you know, Matthew, about the fact, and we share very similar views on this, that it's people, not just tech. So we're going to be looking at human centricity throughout this whole conversation, and also some of the really great use cases that Stridon is seeing before looking at perhaps and then perhaps a summary of your sort of tried and tested methods, which I think people can take away with them. But so tell me, give me a better introduction to Stridon for people that aren't familiar with the company.
Sure. So as you said, I'm founder and CEO at Stridon. We're in 18th year now, and we're a strategic technology partner to law firms, really founded with a singular purpose, which speaks to the people-centric and the human-centric piece just a moment you were talking about there, Caroline. But our whole purpose itself is to create positive impact to people's lives in everything that we actually do. And how we do that is by helping firms to transform business performance through people and tech. So people is going to come up an awful lot. It's really, if you were a stick of rock and you snap us in two, it's the founding principle of our culture, our values and everything else. And I think that's really where the differentiator is for us in terms of how we build rapport relationships with our clients. And we do that by covering a huge range of capability. At the very top end, working with senior leadership teams to really build the vision of the tomorrow for technology, mapping that out, creating the roadmap for technology, through to our solutions capability, the actual delivery side, project implementation, covering everything from the usual M365 or the Microsoft ecosystem work, data center, networking, cybersecurity, all wrapped around with our managed services team, which help our clients to manage and respond to their technology environments on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully we execute that really well and bring that all the way back to really creating that people-centric type of view and thought process of how we can be successful with technology. People come first, then we bring the technology in once we've understood the individuals, the culture, the firms, and how their teams work. So that's a short interlude to us.
Yeah, no, great. And so tell me about the types of programs you are involved in. So obviously Wedlake Bell is your poster child, as I described them. You've done a lot of work with them, but talk more generally about some of the GenAI programs you're involved in across the board, including with Wedlake Bell.
Sure. GenAI obviously is a particular topical area at this moment. Probably 99% of everyone we have engagement with, it becomes a topic of conversation within about 5 minutes flat, as for good reason, with the potential that's out there. And also, actually, it's quite a mysterious landscape to try and navigate around them. So part of the work that we do is really across the board. You've mentioned Wedlake. We're working with them through an end-to-end program through our Copilot Success Plan and our framework, but broadly across lots of our professional services clients and numerous law firm clients that we're working with right now on that. It starts really from the very early inception point of understanding where they are with their understanding of AI, not just generative AI, but AI full stop. And that's really step number one, is working out where and how and the what of where your entire aspect of where you believe generative AI or AI tooling can actually benefit your firm, because there's just such a plethora of thousands and thousands of tools. The tools that you used yesterday that didn't have the word AI in, all of a sudden have AI in. I think that confusion aspect is really difficult. Where do you begin? So that's our first step, is really understanding, building that landscape out and helping people to build their AI vision. And then all the way through to really looking at the fundamentals of, once you've identified that and built that vision, and then you're looking at specifics of actually what is it you're trying to achieve. It's then helping firms to plan and plot that through. So we're involved in everything that stretches from helping people to build out AI governance and policy, all the way through to, we use a process to bring AI principles in, more of a visual reference of almost like traffic lighting, an amber, green, red type principle of where and what you can use tooling for, right the way through the change management function, supporting organizations in terms of bringing together the right type of teams, the right kind of roles, helping to communicate that out, and then delivering all the way through in terms of a proof of value, running a 12-week program with these organizations to start from the art of the possible through to having a really well entrenched, very clear plan for deployment across organizations, always coming back and connecting to the level of success you're looking to generate, being able to measure that, being able to quantify it, really putting some of the, taking some of the mysterious away and bringing it down to what we like to reference as something that's rather pragmatic in its sense of, you can point at it, you can see what it's going to deliver, you can measure that output, and all of that becomes part and parcel of some of the work that we do with those firms, of taking them up to that point and then supporting them on the deployment process from that point forward. But huge amounts of this, when it comes to the GenAI aspect of it, is really geared around the individual and the people that are working within those firms, rather than it being a technology play.
And you've obviously got a very good, close relationship with Microsoft. How much is it about in the engagement? How much is it about Microsoft? How much is it about Microsoft Copilot? And then how much is it about other tools?
It depends is the first answer to that. So it depends on where the clients are in the first instance. The actual framework that we work to is a GenAI specific framework of what we've used as our solutioning methodology anyway. So the process itself, how you build engagement, how you connect with people, deal with the communication side of things, how you manage the people side of change. It's not tool specific. It's not even vendor specific in that regard. It's agnostic. But from the Microsoft Copilot work that we do, we're not just dealing with the Copilot side, but of course there's the supporting cast of tools that Microsoft have in the background, everything from compliance and the security side of the equation. We're helping clients to really either leverage what they already have, or look at building that and plotting that forward in terms of saying if there's gaps in the security posture or governance posture. So there's a big ecosystem. The bit that people are engaging with, that front end tool of Copilot, is one aspect, but it's behind the scenes, which is also critically important for firms to get a handle on. You can't just throw the tool out there and hope for the best.
Which is still what I see firms doing. I'm sure that
Yeah. they do, and actually quite frequently. Part of that, I think, is the challenge of just thinking about, well, how do you even get started with it? Yeah. And what's normally typical in technology land and tech projects is you give you give a capability or to a small contingent trial group of people and get them to test the technology out and provide feedback. But of course, this isn't just here's a tool that does one thing. This is generative AI assistants are things that are an open playbook. It's like having a blank sheet of paper. If you just give people a blank sheet of paper, it's really difficult to get started saying, but what am I supposed to use it for? And that's really what the encouragement we have with people to build these programs out and use the success framework, because it's that infuses the energy into these programs to start with. And I think Gartner's last release on the GenAI or AI hype curve in November had generative AI assistants firmly going down into the trough of disillusionment. And I think a lot of that is because there was just this throw some licenses out there and see what happens. And of course, not great results were coming back.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And I spoke to an IT director recently about that, about how it's almost like people have forgotten first principles of introducing new technology, which and much of that is focusing on the adoption, which is obviously what you do. We're going to come on to talk about adoption heavily. So in terms of the foundations, so you start with, obviously, there's all sorts of assessments, but in terms of the stakeholders, the people, as we're going to come back to again and again. So how do you get the right people involved? Tell me about bringing in the right stakeholders, what that looks like from a people perspective in terms of laying those foundations.
But any technology project, full stop, requires the right level of stakeholder engagement for it to be successful, depending on what that actually is, depends on the level of stakeholder investment you're going to need with it. But this is where that partnership for us is, where technology needs to work in partnership with the other parts of an organization and with the management teams themselves. For anything that's AI driven, I think there's that real necessity to have the highest level of engagement from that stakeholder positioning. One, because if you're going to be successful, you've got to tie back the objectives of any development of AI programs, implementation of technology, ultimately to organizational goals, so that there's a firmly linked aspect of why are we doing this in the first place. So that stakeholder at the very top end should be somebody that's in a board or a very senior position that can give the initiative voice, gives it gravitas, if you like, to make sure that it's not overlooked. When best will in the world, and worked on an inside of tech and outside of tech, from an internal perspective anyway, from a delivery, when technologists send emails out, they're not necessarily ones that are going to be engaged with, as well as it could be when a managing partner or a senior stakeholder is communicating those things out. And what you're trying to do very quickly early on is ensure that messaging, ensure that engagement's there at very high level, because it then anchors this around being an organizational change initiative rather than just here is another technology rollout. And as you come through, the stakeholder is someone that's going to be very busy. So it's not like they're going to be able to lean in and give you 50 hours of their time. This is where sponsors then come in. And choosing sponsors, and some sponsors work again at senior levels, practice group leads, people that have that voice also, that can carry that through, that can command an element of when they're communicating out, then people engage, people will follow along. And so normally we'll have sponsors that are from the lawyering side again. Occasionally there'll be from a director level, somebody that might be entrenched in the business transformation type of roles, but normally the sponsors are also going to come from the partnership as well. And that's a key part of success, because as we come through from stakeholders, sponsors, and then champions, which we can get onto in a little while, you want that rich blend of experience from across the organization, across the firm, so that you're building skills, capability, positive momentum that you're going to leverage as you get further down the track. So choice of the right individuals, well motivated, people that carry a positive tone of voice, these are all really critical elements of deciding and working with and going out and ultimately using the word recruit here, recruiting the right people into the program to ensure that you start off with a really strong basis, and that carries all the way through until the end of your proof of value and then deployment ultimately.
Let me know in the chat if this resonates with you, or see if you've got any questions. One thing I see, sort of trying to foster collaboration can be really difficult, and in terms of who's involved, there almost seems to be sometimes don't laugh at me because I know that this is quite obvious, but there's like who's in charge of the project seems to be a big conversation at the moment, to be frank with you. And there's new roles, and the roles are growing. So is it IT, is it KM, is it the head of AI, is it and to me that seems not very helpful in terms of achieving the overall goal, which is very easy for me to say from my position here writing and not being involved. How do you what can you share about the way that works most successfully, and how you try to encourage collaboration? Because it seems to be a problem that a lot of people are struggling with, to be frank.
Yeah, and it has been for a long time, I think. One of the outcomes, I think, where we look at just technology full stop, is the engagement or lack of engagement and the isolated delivery of technology initiatives, products and service ends up with lower levels of value being returned out the back end of those initiatives. Adoption ends up being a bit lower, sometimes catastrophically lower. Often people look at something and say, what's the point of this? Like, why even? I'm not interested. It's not helping me. I'll just go back to what I was doing before. And that takes a lot of energy to be able to migrate away from that habituated process that you see routinely. Now, depending on the size of firm, is going to also depend on the roles and the capability within the firm itself. We massively push on through our solutioning methodology. We're using change management initiatives throughout the process here to bring people together. And actually, I think one of the observations you have is that challenging collaboration piece is there, because so many firms are not necessarily geared towards that. It's an isolated delivery. It belongs to a team, as opposed to something like this is not in the ownership of a singular team. It is an organizational change program, and therefore you've really got to get that collaboration to work and people working cohesively together. But you also have to challenge the barrier that people have with, we're not giving you, certainly in those early days, we're not giving people a tool to say it's finished, there you go, here's a complete product, go and test it and make sure it works. We're actually engaging people and champions to help work out the nuances, the specifics of where's the value, where's the capability, where are those use cases that are unique to each and every individual firm. The pleasing thing is that you can get that encouragement going. It does take energy. You have to feed that constantly up front and give people a safe environment so they understand they can provide different types of feedback. It's not all about the rose tinted glasses with this stuff. We actually want to get a range of feedback that covers the good, the bad, the ugly, ultimately, and that's where you create success. Not a fallacy of we don't want to hear any of the negative stuff, we just want all the good stuff. I think that's one of the most pleasing things we've seen. The outcome from this in these programs is that it's encouraged really high levels of collaboration. And there's certain standouts, there's certain folks that maybe just don't have the time to engage, but that's why choosing the right people is really effective. And that blends. So we create a project team. The project team then has your subject matter experts. That might be somebody from a compliance side, technology side, maybe the key stakeholder there might be head of technology committee, head of innovation from the partner side. And it's that project team that really own the initiative itself, but the stakeholder that sits on the top is empowering that project team to actually do what it needs to do. So the project team doesn't need to be huge, and it can become somewhat unwieldy. And then you just have a death of committee and meetings in that space, but making sure that you've got a right blend of 4, 5, 6, depending on size of firm, individuals in that original team, along with those that are doing the delivery, I think is super critical to the success of any of these initiatives.
Interesting. And just so you talk about at the very beginning, the managing partner, this needing buy-in from the top, the tone from the top. I'm not sure I love that expression, but anyway, nonetheless, it says, it kind of does what it says. So are you seeing that there seems to be, I've been writing about tech for 10 years, I've been writing about the legal sector for donkey's years. There seems to me to be transformation, but is it meaningful change in tone from the top, would you say?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, but I think there's definitely a landscape shift, not just with generative AI, but there's a landscape shift. The more that technology is really infused into how law firms look at transformation itself. And so many firms over the last decade have looked at ways of bringing transformation in, of how they deliver legal services, whether that's from a client experience point of view, whether that's actually post-pandemic looking at employee well-being and the talent development, the retention side. I think that promotes a high level of engagement. But with GenAI, I think it's that with bells and whistles on top of it. And I mean, we're talking about conference season in full flight through June. And the ones that I've been to, I expect you've seen the same. There's super high level of engagement. And of course, most of those things are permeated with some form of generative AI or AI topics. But you're seeing huge levels of engagement at the very top end of firms. And I think that really showcases how serious organizations are about tackling how do they move forward, how do they transform, whether it's generative AI or anything else. But there's a clear need of people looking at this through the lens of saying, okay, this isn't something that we can just sit out on the sidelines. We need to engage. We can't leave this to other people. We need to really understand what is it that we're going to build as our vision as a firm as we then move ourselves forward.
I couldn't agree more, actually. I think there's this real sense of maybe I actually would use the word crisis, but also existential change, which is meaning they're thinking about so many things, right from front end to back end to time and billing, to sort of the very core of everything that has made law firms, able to deliver their work product, which is now going to change. So it's not surprising. So fine. So we've talked about the foundations, getting the right people involved, getting the stakeholders involved. And I think, have we covered all of your, so we're going to come back to refresh, but have we covered to get all of your kind of key steps in terms of, creating organizational changes? Is there anything that I've missed in terms of creating that sort of roadmap and then starting to deliver it?
Really, when it will come back, when we do the refresh, we can talk in more specific terms around it. The first three phases, you've got your readiness phase, you've got the defined objectives, and then the proof of value. And really, if you take all of those three things together, that's where you're assimilating that project team, you're building the engagement with senior stakeholders to empower it. You're building specifics, those defining objectives. That's a really critical part, and you're using the project team to be able to do that, so that there is a blend of people's views coming into, well, what's the outcome we're looking to achieve? I think the critical success factor there, how will you measure if you were successful with this, if you don't have a very clear vision of what it is you want to achieve to start with? It becomes a bit wishy-washy and a bit ambiguous, which is, I think, the death knell for any AI project, because then it's not exactly the cheapest tools on earth. But if you can prove the value out, then actually they can become very valuable. So defining the objectives, really critical. And then that proof of value piece is really where the bulk of work goes in. Iterative feedback loops, training, that safe environment for people to take on those tools, test them, feedback, and actually become very collaborative themselves. And I think you referenced the top down's not always the best way of achieving things. And actually, this is very much organically, once you've infused these programs. The real success, I think, comes in from those programs continuing to live on and people continuing to collaborate once you actually finish that phase. And that's something that I think is what we're starting to see slowly but surely, but that's really where super success can come into play. Whereas you're not constantly feeding down the examples, it's the people that are using those tools feeding back to one another, practice groups developing how they want to use it, their own prompts, sharing success. That's really critical in that phase. Yeah,
you mentioned organizational goals. That one of the things that I see with GenAI tools that perhaps is an evolving thing, is that people are realizing that they really need to be leveraging their own IP, their own USP. And I think your point was so important about, really understanding what your organization is and what you are trying to achieve, not just so I'm in the business of press and writing about all of the different developments and different tools. And I think there was a temptation for firms to jump on everything that so-and-so another firm is doing. I hope that there's a maturing in the organization where people are really starting to work out what's good for them and how to leverage their own, what makes them special. I think that seems to be a more maturing part of this cycle.
100%. I think that's where you can make a difference. But it's also, if you think about how you create organizational change. Well, just take change full stop. Human beings, by their very nature, are not necessarily fully embracing of change. People are generally change resistant. We're happy with what we do and how we do it. There has to be a really good reason for that change in order to then motivate the desire to move towards that particular outcome. And if you can take these tools, and those tools can be used in millions of different ways, and each one of them could be unique to your organization. And whilst you can take, we've developed the framework in a way that you can take this down in any firm, but every single environment, the uniqueness that you create there is no, people can have said before, like, oh, yeah, but it's the law firms, they all work the same. Well, fundamentally, you deliver legal services, but no one single firm is the same as one another, even if you are delivering the same legal outcomes, because no one firm has the same people in it that you do. And that uniqueness, and that's what's been so, I mean, it's quite incredible. Where you get the right framework there, you start to see this level of creativity that I don't think people really would have appreciated or realized is there in those legal teams. And that's been one of the most surprising aspects of it. And I think that comes back to infuse the environment with the right attributes, support, and training to start with, that you then see people pick up and start running with this capability and using it and defining it in ways that are unique, not just to their firm, but unique to themselves. And that's where I think longer term you really win with this, is we're not talking about a tool, we're talking about capability and skills. So helping people to develop skills which they can apply every day by looking at what they do themselves and how and where they want to deliver some improvements in their everyday. And we're not in the game of, I think you see too often, coming back to the same thing. Well, improve productivity, improve efficiency, bill more hours. It's very repetitious to the extent where I think you could probably buy 10 tools and retire immediately and make much more money if the premise was really true. The reality, of course, is not. So we want to be able to really put that messaging out there of unlocking time. But every individual is going to do that in their own unique and creative way. Our job is to just infuse enough energy and enough support to get them going on that journey.
Yeah, there's someone in the chat, Joe in the chat says totally resonates. So something I came across, especially at the top level, is fear of hallucinations. This is going back to a point you made actually just a second ago, to be honest, when we were talking a bit more about playing things safe. So my peers in the industry are just waiting for the hype to die down, balance against, if you're not on the bus now, you're already behind. Sending people into a tailspin. That's a good way to describe it. How do you handle that, especially at the start?
It's a very common fear factor or one of many things with Gen AI tools. One of them being the outcome. Can you trust the outcome? And I think trust is the word I would use here around it. Is we're implementing capability that has been around only for the last couple of years. There isn't the basis of, well, what's best practice, because you can't really have developed best practice in 2 years flat, with most organizations haven't actually done anything with it. For me, it comes back to that, taking a sensible and pragmatic approach to generative AI in the first place, being wide open to the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes down to what works and what doesn't. But this is also why you just really don't take a tool and just throw it across the whole of your organization. And it's by building trust. That's where you come back to that project team, come back to the champions that you have. We talked about, we mentioned Wedlake. They're roughly 400 people, and we've got 27 of those 400 as champions. Now, those folks start from the position of they're motivated and they want to be involved in the program, but they also have lots of questions, fear. Well, is it good enough? Is it going to generate hallucinations? Is the outcome, how can it be trusted? And the job here is to go through that program safe, training-wise, to start there, to build up the trust basis and help people to understand when you shouldn't use the tools or when you need additional level of oversight. And what we try and get is coming back to that traffic light system on the AI principles, as opposed to lots of policy document. That's very difficult to navigate around. So create a really visual principles, which gives people that aspect. If it's green, it's a pretty good use case. You can go for it. Everything needs human oversight. We're not talking about complete displacement here. You still oversight what it's doing. Amber stuff is where you start to think, well, we're going to put a warning on that to say, yes, we're okay with you doing this, but here's the things to be aware of. And then all the way through to red to say, this is just not what it's good at the moment. And that transparency and that building trust, I think if you can get there with that proof of value before you then roll it across the firm, you'll then have 27 very motivated, trained, engaged people that can help to actually then spread that message through your organization and immediately have referenceability to how it can be trusted, but when it's used appropriately.
Super interesting. So with the fine, so and with the red, amber, green, so would you do it at a policy level and also a tool level? Would you say, for example, I know that people have struggled with public GenAI tools, how to approach that. There's different approaches. Different firms I speak to take different approaches. Some of them would be very much red. Some of them would be red for certain stuff, green for other stuff. So would you, with your red, amber, green system, would you have it at kind of a very high level policy level, and then also within a tool, or how does that work?
We try it. If you look at GenAI tools, full stop, you've got tools or AI tools. You have tools that are built for a specific purpose. So you could take something that's like, let's say, Orbital Copilot as an example. It's built to do a specific thing in a specific area. So that might be an aspect there where, if you're choosing to embed that tool in your organization, by design, you're saying, well, we're trusting of that tool, otherwise why have it in the first instance? So that's an area you can greenlight that. It's where you move into the space where you could use some like a M365 Copilot you can use for unbelievable levels of different use cases, and that's where you come into more use case specific, still at high level, but you might have in there, for example, on your use cases around using it to summarize a client email or summarize a document, all the way through to drafting a new contract and everything that sits in between. And you're exactly right, each firm's different based on how they feel about the use of AI, what they've engaged with, their clients are asking for, what's their risk appetite. So one firm's amber could be another firm's red, one firm's green might be another firm's red. So it's very much getting into uncovering and surfacing up the opportunities that are there, working with those champions group to work out what's safe, what's not, and then translating that into that visual guidance to help when you move through to a broader rollout, give people the shortcut knowledge of where is it safe to apply the use of generative AI. And of course, the thing there is it develops so quickly that that shouldn't be a static thing either. A quarterly refresh around what that looks like will help people to stay true with current capability.
And do you, forgive me going on about this, but it's so important. This for me seems like one of the most important things in terms of alleviating people's nervousness, reassuring them that, I mean, it's great. So and do you have the kind of guidance at the point of need, or do you in order to help people, or is it kind of a high level, this is what we say about Microsoft Copilot and these are the types of use cases, or is it, or is there a different way? They're sort of reminders as you're using the tool. I suppose this is very much firm by firm as well.
Yeah, I think if we look at the bulk of the work that we're doing with Microsoft Copilot itself, you're building those AI principles as you're moving through proof of value. So there's that iterative process that's going on where you're seeing engaging feedback of what people are using it for to start with. You're using those successes or failures to help provide that, but the goal is, in the end, a clearly published visual document that people can reference. And of course, there's an element of using generative AI to help you here, because here's a great use case for a very small scale agent, which is then if you develop that document set and connect that to an agent, there's no reason why people can't ask the agent, is this a safe use case within my firm? So there's a way in and upon using generative AI tools to help manage those things as well.
Okay, great. So I think, I would quite like to talk about use cases, and we'll see how time goes. It's amazing how quick time goes. So you're starting to see great use cases. It may be that we have a bit of time at the end. There's a couple of things I want to come back to, but I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about the use cases that you're seeing that are perhaps the most exciting. And the examples of how lawyers are using the tech. And I know that you've obviously got partners using agentic AI, which everybody's kind of super fascinated by. So perhaps you could share some use cases that you're seeing.
Yeah, sure. I'll come back to what I said earlier, actually, is that some of the most pleasing aspects of what we see is just the level of creativity that people have when they're empowered with the capability and the know-how to start with. the use cases, I mean, there are so many use cases. And I think that what we try and gear at is when you start using these tools is you're not trying to cut straight to the most complicated automated process to all of a sudden do 3 hours of work in 2 minutes. It's unrealistic that that's going to be an outcome. So we're very much geared towards helping people understand how and where they can start to use the tool to save 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's an assistant in the end. So it's helping to cut to an outcome faster. It's helping to take away some of the administrative oversight or burden away. So specific use cases we've seen from the legal teams themselves, or where they're applying it in the specific way that they're practicing. So people using it for helping to we've had where they've taken content in from an email perspective, and there's huge amounts of information in there and a whole bunch of points that have come across from the other side. They're using Copilot to be able to summarize all of that, export that into a particular Excel sheet to be able to track that information through, or to tabulate that to be able to provide responses. So really basic stuff like that, but something that would have saved that person 10 to 15 minutes, and they could be doing that all of the time. We have others that are using it more from a drafting support tool. So not doing the actual work, you absolutely still need to have the oversight. But if you've already got a templated form of something and you want to then just do a quick, let's say a client letter, a quick drafting of that based on a template, it's a good go-to. It's not going to do a letter for you and you think, right, that's it, I don't have to do anything with it. But if it can get you 60 to 70% of the way there in 30 seconds flat, that's just helping to speed up that time principle. We did have an example early on, actually, with agentic use, where somebody had produced an agent and then given the agent examples of their own writing style and work, and then they were using the agent to actually quickly sense check their own outputs, quote, sound like me type agent. That's before we even did any training on agents. So it's again this really good example of people just thinking of an idea, ends up being surpassed very quickly with some of the newer releases. Now you'll start to get more of that memory within your Copilot agents anyway, so that they will naturally sound more like you. So many aspects where we've got business development aspects, people going into meetings and they want to get backgrounding of the group of people they're going to meet at a client lunch, for example. A quick prompt in there produces a summarized output 30 seconds later of the people that they're going to meet, who they are, what they do, things of that nature. Sense checking legal arguments. And again, let's make sure we're clear. This is not it doing the job for you, but it's an aspect to say, well, we've got a potential argument we're putting forward. Here are the points that we've put in there. Actually, let me just sense check that. Have I missed anything? Am I taking a different viewpoint against from that perspective? And on and on and on, lots of specific things. So it covers everything now very quickly, which was surprising from the administrative side, but actually assisting people to speed up the delivery of their work product and helping them be more, I think it's cutting to the outcome faster, which of course means you can turn around speed of response to your clients. Initial outputs could be generated quicker, faster. I just saw a prompt popping up there around Copilot.
I think it's just saying by design Copilot doesn't have everyone can see it, but anyway, by design Copilot doesn't have a memory. This is an observation on a point that you made, Matthew, about Copilot sounding like the partner. So it's a fresh slate with every prompt. It won't sound like you unless you remind it to look at your samples every time. I don't know what your thoughts are. It's more of an observation, but I'm sure you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, well, there's two things on that. That specific example is where someone created an agent rather than just in the standard response tool. So the agent, by design, that agent is sourcing those samples every single time in order to provide that response aspect. But the second aspect of that memory piece is actually that's a functionality that's about to come into Copilot itself. So today it doesn't have memory capability, but the underlying model that it uses, which I think many people know is a fork from OpenAI, memory is going to be part and parcel and going to come into Copilot in an imminent release cycle. And furthermore, there's actually a training module that's you have to be an organization with 5,000 seats of Copilot to get access to this at the moment. So beyond most organizations, but they're introducing a training feature. So if you turn it up, it will then learn and memorize, and it will be able to do much more of that. So it's a really good example of actually very quickly, it didn't have memory. It forgets everything, every single prompt. and within the space of the next three months or so, roughly, but certainly within the 18 months since general release, the product's just moved forward tremendously, which of course is really difficult for people because you have to keep up with this constant chasing of your tail. You'll do something one week and then a new feature pops up the next. That's really hard for people to manage as well.
Yeah, I'm speaking to firms, including at all of the conferences that we've just talked about, where they're starting to be very strategic about how they're thinking about it, and so they're looking at two things. One, they're thinking about all of their non-billable time and how they could potentially use GenAI in order to not spend time doing that. Yep. But also things like you mentioned business development, which in my experience firms haven't been able to do very well, speaking frankly, and really starting to up their game on that and realizing that there's such huge potential in terms of not only sort of going to a meeting, but sort of really understanding how they're working with firms, with companies, and starting to have that real sort of organizational understanding, and those seem to be quite exciting use cases.
Yeah, and you can look across business development, compliance, finance, billing. Yeah, there's just so many different aspects that you can look at through that. But I think what we'll end up seeing, and it's starting to happen now, but what we'll end up seeing is, let's say you have your business development or marketing team, and they constantly do have that struggle of providing resources, materials, and training to help partners and senior associates to develop new opportunities. Well, actually, you could move to the realm here where they can build or develop out specific agents that are anchored around how you do some of those things, and I think that will then very much help to build engagement, but to get greater degree of capacity. There's only so many people that can be trying to push the agenda behind business development, but if we can empower people, tools, or a specific agent that they can just feed in the company name or the individual, and it's already pre-formatted prompt-wise to be able to then bring a pre-templated set of responses back. I think that's another area. Of course, we can use them in every single aspect of what we're doing. That's the promise of the future with this, is each of those very individual type of things that we're doing on the everyday, how do we do them quicker, faster, but with a higher level of potential accuracy behind it. And AI is not some kind of magic bullet and just going to magically do everything for you, but actually if we can work with generative AI and have AI assist us in those tasks, at the moment, that's an area that you can really generate success in.
You mentioned about when you were talking about agentic AI, you mentioned, I forget how you put it exactly, but along the lines of you would always have a human in the loop type thing. I've spoken to one company recently. I've written about it today actually, and they have organisations. They're more on the in-house side. They have people using agentic AI with no supervision whatsoever, doing fairly high-level work, which perhaps I'm backwards, but I was quite surprised at this stage in time, and they've obviously got all of the checks and the balances and the agentic AI, but they're all agentic. Yep. And they're working with a really high-profile firm, and it's actually super exciting because obviously, as we know, there's a lot of legal work that particularly in-house teams don't have time to do, law firms, it's anyway. But I just felt that was quite unusual at this stage in the market. Are you seeing that much of that yet, or not yet?
I wouldn't say that's the atypical space for majority of firms to be. It's entirely possible, but when you're in that particular space, you're building something for a very particular outcome, as opposed to more of this with Copilot and GenAI assistant tools. They're just very they're broad by design rather than being very narrow around it. And I think that's where the differential is. And certainly when you move into agentic space, the nature of agentic AI is to autonomously do things on your behalf. So you can't have complete oversight around what it's actually doing. There is an element of building trust to do that. That's where I think a high level of energy is needed to really validate what's it doing, how's it doing it. But you're building something for a specific use case rather than saying, I have this general toolkit that I can pull the different tools out to do different jobs, as opposed to if you need to hit a nail, you're going to use a hammer. It's quite a different use case there.
I suppose, yeah, because what I said may not have sounded like it made any sense, but what I suppose what I'm seeing at the moment is not agentic. There's always a human in the loop. It shows you at stages. I suppose what it's doing is building
Yep.
trust, because we're not ready yet. So I suppose strictly a lot of the stuff is not agentic, because it will show you the steps it's going to take, and then you will approve as it goes. But I suppose ultimately we're driving to a point where really we've built the trust, and for certain tasks we just go, that's absolutely fine. We don't need to have the human in the loop. It's a really challenging time for lawyers, I think. It's super
Sure.
exciting, but it's challenging.
Very challenging, but I think that's a really good point that you just raised on that, because for me, there's also this aspect that comes into play when you talk about trust. Is also, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And if we're embedding, there's a really big difference of saying we're buying a particular tool for a particular task in a particular group. You're going to approach that in a different way than saying we're wanting to roll out generative AI to every person in our entire organization, generative AI assistant tools. And so you're coming at that from a different place. Now, if you want to move, let's say 400 people to be able to leverage generative AI assistant tools like Copilot on the everyday, then you have to go through the gears of building trust in those tools to start with. Now, some people will go along on the journey, organically, and they'll do so they'll jump in with 2 feet and off they go. We know early adopters exist in every organization, but we're talking about all people moving along on that journey. And so therefore, you can't just take the car out first and jam it in 6 and expect it not to stall. Invariably it will. This is no different. So when you're starting to build towards more of those automated bits, how do people have that trust? They need to have the ability to see what's it doing, to have done it themselves, to have that oversight. So again, that's culturally led. It depends on where your organization is, but generally from a people perspective, helping them move through the motions is going to generate longer term success and trust, rather than trying to cut to the end game too quickly, too fast. Because if you do that and a mistake happens, you undermine the principle of trust. Very hard to then bring people back to the table again. So yes, you need to, I think, as Joe put it, be on the bus to get going with this to start with. But doing it in a sensible, pragmatic way, this thing's going to be around for quite some time. Getting it right is more important than rushing in with 2 feet.
And presumably that's about continue. You mentioned at the beginning about this is in a one step process. So this is about continuously going back to people, continuous training, presumably continuous education and continuous support as well. You can't just, you started off by saying can't just give them a tool. I do see this, I'm sure this happens a lot, tool and off they go. This is about that continuous reassurance, that continuous support, which is a challenge, right? It's a challenge, and it's quite time consuming, but presumably that's the only way.
I think very much with this, because it's an evolving technology, but also it's going to take a while to embed those skills organizationally, not just the skills of using, say, prompting, the key part of how we can leverage these tools to start with, but actually those cultural shifts and changes. We're giving people the ability to say, hey, this is going to change the way you do work. And that's not necessarily something that yes, we've had change with the way that we work over the last 20 or 30 years, of course, and the pandemic was a really significant driver for creating that change, but not at the level of a capability that enables people to change the unique ways that they work across so many areas every single day. And I think that will take some time to truly embed that. Microsoft builds towards this frontier firm concept now, where frontier firms being firms that are geared straight towards leveraging GenAI, and specifically with agents. But they're plotting that through over the next 3 to 5 years as a timetable for, within that time frame, most firms will be on the road to becoming a frontier firm. And essentially, it's a combination of the key talent and individuals is the I saw that Neil's prompt up there, and it just threw me off. It's a very good point too, and yes, indeed, is the answer. It can do that as well, but the movement of ultimately moving towards this frontier firm is really about this final state position of saying it's the uniqueness of human beings, where that knowledge sits, and then building and buying capacity on tap through the use of agentic AI and GenAI tooling to help us scale organizations to really ramp up the levels of productivity. And let's be honest, no one's probably sitting around there saying, oh, I've got lots of excess capacity, I can take more down in my day. I think everyone wants to do and needs to be able to do less. And this is the ability for us to deliver the impact positively back. This is part of that people-centric piece. It's not just about let's work everyone at the same level all of the time. Giving people back some time, unlocking time, might be because we want to do that to promote better mental health and well-being in the everyday. And that I think is a hugely positive impact that we can actually steer the ship on with generative AI. It's not just about billing more time, it's not just about the efficiency side. It's actually, as human beings, maybe we could take a bit for ourselves here.
I'd love to come back to that. So, but as you pointed out, like that Neil said, surely AI is the tool to provide continuous training. So, any thoughts on that?
Yes, is the shortcut answer. It's the how. I mean, I was did some testing just last week. We actually built. I was doing some skilling up validation, so creating a prompt, which I shared with one of our clients to use Copilot to generate a learning program for a specific skill set, and looking at trying to learn actual Python scripting. So we built the script, built the prompting for it, but then actually go a stage further and saying, well, actually, this is a great use case for using agents that you can then build that are either for a particular program from a skilling or a training perspective, or something that can be more broader. But yes, leveraging tools themselves to generate that ongoing aspect is one element of it. But you'll of course never get away from this human-centric piece, which is some of how do you surface up those unique pieces that only the individual is really going to work in their own mindset, because they know exactly what they do every single day. They also know what frustrates the heck out of them better than anybody else. We can all guess at some of those areas, but those are the areas that become go-to for people. But the continuous, that point that you made around that continuous change, I think this is where we'll start to see the adaptation of different roles coming into organizations that may not exist at the moment, or where they do exist, you're augmenting it with additional AI capability, because it's not just about learning it on day one, it's about 6 months from now, 12 months from now, as the tool and capabilities improve, as the underlying large language models improve, as agentic AI continues to barrel along at a pace. These are all challenges people have now. But that continuous refresh of capability is going to be a real challenge. So we have a continuous phase in our roadmap, purely because it's recognition of you have to keep going back and measuring, is this working, is it successful, using some of the Microsoft tools to measure levels of adoption when you're leveraging Copilot. The Copilot dashboard is really good to be able to measure levels of adoption, but then supporting a further training and development. And one of the things that we create is a Copilot Center of Excellence in these programs. And that Center of Excellence is where we get people collaborating. So we're posting training material, goes into this content area, sharing of ideas, but it's where everybody can be part of that community, everyone that would have the Copilot license or GenAI tool access, where everybody then contributes to sharing in the success. And that's part of continuous success too. It doesn't have to be that continual external infusion. It could be people are going to find way more things to do with this than you can ever show them. But once they do that, share that knowledge with others, because all you really need is that spark, that where's the first light bulb moment coming from with these tools. And it's different for every single person. And we see that when we're in rooms with people, we're talking about this, and one person will all of a sudden sit up and go, that's a great, yes, hadn't thought of that. And all of a sudden that starts the process of changing habits, and they start to then leverage the tools more frequently. And then from there on, that's where your momentum really starts to kick into a higher gear.
I've heard that some like success stories, share your success stories, and
Yes.
The unusual use cases. I've heard that with Copilot, there's a big American firm I hosted a small event with, and they found that one of their, I think it was their managing partner, was using Copilot to work out what billable time he'd done during the week. I know managing partners probably don't do always loads of billable time, but anyway, but he was using Copilot to work it out, and they hadn't really thought of it for that use case, and they were just like, well, let's just share that and let's just see how other people are using it. So just real quick, so how much of an issue is firms not moving at the speed that their people want? When I first started writing about legal tech, I wrote a lot about shadow IT, and that term stopped being used as much for lots of different reasons. But tell me about where you're at with that now.
Sure. I think shadow IT is still out there, but in AI form, it's referenced now as shadow AI. And there are literally hundreds of tools out there. We within that Microsoft stack, majority of firms will have access to this capability. You can actually measure it with some of the tools if you've deployed them within the Microsoft context, and see where shadow AI use is occurring within the firm. And I think it tracks nearly 400 different GenAI tools at the moment. That can be really problematic. One is identifying people are even doing this in the first instance. Two, how does the impact on your policy or your principles? We're having this conversation actually with a client last week around, well, how strict do you make it? If you've rolled out Copilot and you've given people the tooling in the first place, why do we need to allow them access to all of these other tools? And I think you referenced it earlier on in our conversation there. Firms are doing different things. Some will just lock it all down and say, well, we're not allowing access to any of these things, but you have to empower people with the tool to be able to do that. The danger, of course, is you just drive back towards the core principles of why shadow IT became a thing, which is if you're not providing people with the services, the tools and the means of how they want to be able to engage in their work, then they'll find alternate mechanisms. And of course, you really don't want that to be happening with generative AI use. We always take the principle first and foremost, is rather than trying to build ever bigger walls to try and stop people getting out, is just move the walls so far back that they sort of don't even realize they're there. That's about having good governance processes, monitoring, oversight. But also, if you give people something that works really well, that you show them how it works, if you train them on the use of those tools, tell them what's safe, encourage them to be actually engaging with it, it's the easier pathway than trying to circumnavigate around and use the shadow IT or shadow AI tools full stop. So first and foremost, we always try to advocate positive aspects, create an environment that people want to use, because then you're removing the reason of why they're using something else, but also use your governance processes to monitor for potential use that you're not really well aligned with. And if you can't bring people back over the side to say, hey, we're not blocking this stuff, but we're still seeing too high a use, then you may need to move towards more of a restrictive type of footing. But I also know for some firms at the other end, where they just don't take the risk. They're not willing to take that risk because of that confidentiality hit, client reputation. Actually, insurers now, this is a conversation that's starting to occur. This year, you're starting to see insurers asking certain questions. What are you doing with it? Are you enabling it? Are you blocking it? And I think this then becomes the next bastion of challenge, like cyber insurance was when it first came into play. You start with a few questions. A couple of years from now, I think that regulatory and insurance framework is going to be driving certain behaviours as well.
So yes, yeah, 100%. Just so fine. So we're pretty much at time, but I just wanted to leave people with a sort of summary, so to take away to help them, the summary of the 5 stages that you think are absolutely key in Gen AI adoption in terms of your plan.
Sure. So those 5 stages, step number 1, readiness. Assess your existing data security, data hygiene, your policy and your principles. They are all critical before you run off down the road of implementing Microsoft Copilot. Second phase is that defining the objectives. Assimilate your project team, identify your stakeholder who's going to really own the project, or give it the gravity and the gravitas that it needs. Identify those subject matter experts who could come from compliance side, technology side, innovation, the team that will really be the driving force. Work out who will sponsor that initiative then within your team. Your sponsors then, 2 or 3 of those that probably work for majority of size firms. Then go and recruit your champions. Go and find all those people that are chomping at the bit to gain access to this, that were willing to put upwards of 2 to 3 hours a week into the initiative using the tool. The good thing is you're giving them a tool that's going to give them time. So 2 to 3 hours isn't quite as bad as it might sound. And then run that proof of value. Look at it across a 3-month process. Use the first 2 months to really develop weekly training, feedback session, encourage that community sharing through your center of excellence to really uncover those use cases, help people to develop those use cases, lean into that to help them then navigate around what's not working so well or what is. have those feedback sessions. You must get feedback from folks as you're going along. It's a two-way street, not one way. You need to get the feedback, how they're experiencing, what are their challenges, and then use that to refine what you deliver in your training program again. The last month is really where you've delivered the training in your core training, and you're letting people really then explore and use to the full extent in that last month. This is where you're refining the what's, the hows, what works well, what doesn't. You're finalizing those AI principles. You're essentially building the change management plan for a firm-wide deployment at that particular point. So you should be, if that's all worked really well, at the stage of having a very clear vision for how this will work in your firm, where the strong use cases are. You have an embedded group of champions who are ready and excited to spread the word around this throughout your firm, and you've proven the value that it can generate and give to you. I think all of those things is why we'll end up seeing more and more firms as we work with them, not just doing 10, 20 or 30 licenses of Copilot, but going for full firm-wide deployments of it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So helpful. We're at time. I would like to say thank you to everyone listening in and for your questions. It's been great to have your engagement. Thank you. And I really genuinely found that so helpful, Matthew. Thank you. We've moved past very much, you know, the stage of everybody talking about the ifs. We're moving to the hows, but it's still not easy, you know. And I think these kind of really deeply practical conversations that you can sort of share your expertise and also some of the learning from working with lots of different firms is so invaluable. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you for sharing those insights with us today. Yeah, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Been great to talk about all that in depth, and no doubt more conversations in this area in future.
Yeah, I have no doubt.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks everyone.